also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Very good morning and a warm welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News, TV, radio and online. I will do my best to get us over this midweek slump on a rainy day with smart guests, frank conversations and all the stories which matter to you. Today, Trump announces that he is officially back in the running for the White House. Do you support his ambition? That's our Twitter poll for today. Liam Halligan will be here for a budget build-up, the very latest from Poland after what appears to be stray missiles killed 2 there, and a great panel to digest the day's stories. That's all coming up after the news with Rosie.
A very good morning. It's 10:01. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister has said it's important to remain calm and to establish the facts after a missile hit a farm in Poland, killing 2 people. Rishi Sunak was part of an emergency meeting of G7 and NATO leaders at the G20 summit in Bali over the incident. The US president has said it's unlikely Russia fired the missile. US intelligence sources have suggested the missile may have been fired by Ukrainian forces. Russia's denied any involvement in the incident and says some countries have made baseless claims, but it welcomed the restraint shown by President Biden. Mr. Sunak also warned it's important not to rush to conclusions.
Yesterday, Russia rained down over 80 missile strikes on the Ukrainians, on civilian infrastructure, electricity, water and such like. That's why we're having this conversation and we can't lose sight of that fact. But we will get to the bottom of what happened and that's what the teams are doing as we speak.
The Prime Minister has described the United States as the UK's closest ally following a meeting with the US President. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden have held bilateral talks on the sidelines of the G20 summit. The White House says the 2 leaders have coordinated on a range of global issues, including a shared commitment to protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It said they agreed to address the economic consequences of the war in Ukraine in an effort to protect the vulnerable and secure a long-term energy supply. Now, the rate of consumer prices index inflation rose to 11.1% last month. The ONS says that's up from 10.1% in September. They've said rising gas and electricity prices, as well as the increasing price of food, has driven inflation to its highest level for over 40 years. Donald Trump has announced he will be running to be the President of the United States.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
He lost the job to Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential race. Mr. Trump's aides have filed paperwork for his 2024 White House bid. Well, the announcement comes after the Republicans failed to win as many seats in Congress in the midterms as they'd hoped. The London mayor's facing questions over the resignation of the former Met Police Commissioner. Sadiq Khan was said to have given Dame Cressida Dick an ultimatum to make plans to improve the force, or he'd issue a statement of no confidence in her. A Home Office report found that Dame Cressida felt intimidated into leaving her job and that due process was not followed before she left. Mr Khan dismissed the findings as clearly biased. NHS England's urging GPs to order more cancer scans in a bid to speed up diagnoses for thousands of people. Currently, those with vague symptoms, that might be a cough or fatigue, they can face long waits to get treatment. Under new guidance, doctors can order more ultrasounds and CT scans, testing patients' symptoms sooner and skipping the need to see a specialist first. Cutting speed limits on urban roads to 20 miles per hour has been found to have little impact on improving safety. UK universities have analysed data from before and after the limit was introduced in central Belfast in 2016. The report says roads at 30 or 40 miles per hour were statistically no different in terms of the number of crashes or casualties. The King will carry out his first full investiture ceremony as sovereign at Windsor Castle today. 2 Conservative MPs will be among the people recognised with royal honours. Sir Robert Buckland will receive the Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire, whilst the former Conservative Party leader, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, will be given a knighthood for political and public service. Now, it was the third time lucky for NASA. After 2 previous failed attempts, Artemis 1 made liftoff this morning.
And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
The crewless rocket blasted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida earlier this morning for a 3-week test journey around the moon and back. It's all part of NASA's plans to return astronauts to the lunar surface as early as 2025. Well, meanwhile, here in the UK Civil Aviation Authority has awarded an operating licence to Spaceport Cornwall in Newquay, enabling it to host the UK's first space launch. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, world leaders have held emergency talks in Bali amid rising global tensions after a missile landed in Poland, killing 2 people. Russia has denied responsibility. Mark White will be here with the very latest. And after months of speculation, Donald Trump has announced his bid for the presidency in 2024, saying that he wants to make America great and glorious again. There are reports that his performance was a little lackluster. We'll find out what you think, and do you support his bid? That's our Twitter poll. We'll be talking to commentators in America about his chances. And as shocking footage appears of a huge car crushing a bicycle and almost killing its owner, why are our road wars getting worse? And of course, your thoughts, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak have held one-on-one talks in Bali at the G20 summit after a missile landed in Poland, killing 2 people. Last night, it appeared that this might escalate the conflict, dragging NATO into the fray. But Mark White, thank you for joining me this morning. It doesn't seem to be that tense now, does it? Although there are still questions to answer.
Yeah, I mean, the watchword, I think, is caution at the moment. Rishi Sunak said at his news conference that officials in this country are working to try to assess exactly where this missile came from. There are security officials that have been speaking to the Associated Press, anonymously suggesting it may have been a Ukrainian missile. But to be honest, whether the missile came from Russia or Ukraine, the end effect will be the same, which will be to galvanise NATO to come full square behind not just Poland, obviously, because of the concerns it has about a war raging on its own border, but also to give Ukraine the weapon systems it's been calling for a long time. And we've given Ukraine many millions of pounds, as have other countries, and weapon systems. But obviously you're fighting a large aggressor like Russia, who just yesterday launched 80-plus missiles at Ukrainian targets in towns and cities right across Ukraine, targeting civilian infrastructure and civilian areas. Well, I'm afraid, you know, a missile going astray, if that's what happened, is a real-world consequence of what happens when you have a war raging like this. So President Zelensky has been calling for some time for the more sophisticated NATO air defence systems to help him out. And recently, actually, the British military, along with NATO allies, were exercising in Poland and other countries in the region with air defence systems to try to enhance their capabilities there. And it may be, Bev, that Poland actually now asks NATO for more help in bolstering its air defences, because a stray missile is a very real possibility, as we've seen played out.
Is there a precedent for this, Mark? I was trying to think, in other conflicts, I'm trying to think when America and Great Britain, we were fighting in Iraq, for instance. There's this terrible term, isn't there, of collateral damage. You know, in this situation, 2 people have lost their lives. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these instances have to trigger a huge escalation, does it?
No, and I don't think they will. I mean, even if at the end of this investigation, it turns out that this was a Russian-fired missile, no one really realistically believes that takes a measured view of this, that would have been a deliberate choice by the Russians to target Poland. Whatever it was from Russia or Ukraine, it was probably a missile going astray or accidentally hitting Polish soil. But the net consequence will be the same. It will be to stiffen the resolve of NATO countries, yes, to go full square behind Poland and offer Poland whatever it needs to feel that it's more secure in terms of its ability to prevent these missiles coming over its border again, but also, as I say, to give President Zelensky more of the weapon systems that he feels he needs to be able to better and more accurately target these missiles coming over from Russia, because it's clear we're in a new phase of the war, having suffered some very significant defeats recently, including surrendering effectively and pulling out of the city of Kherson in the south of Ukraine. Russia's smarting from that. It's resulted in them now sending many, many more missiles over to try to pummel the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. So we are going to potentially see the risk of more missiles going astray like this, hitting civilian targets in Ukraine, but also potentially neighbouring countries, as we've seen in Poland.
In offence, this is Putin's reaction to getting a bloody nose in Kherson. He turned up the volume, didn't he, on the attacks. We're going to talk now, thank you, Mark, don't go anywhere just for the moment. We're going to talk now to Magdalena Skajewska, Global Affairs Correspondent at Polish Radio, and Jan Streczek, a spokesman for the Agreement Party. Good morning, both. Thank you ever so much for joining me. If I can come to you, Magdalena, first. How was the news of these stray missiles, shall we call them, greeted in Poland?
Well, I would say that last night, the mood here in Poland, I believe, was quite somber, because I think many Poles might have been thinking that it was exactly what everyone feared, that whether it was a deliberate or accidental strike or attack, everyone feared that one way or another, since the beginning of the war, there is a possibility that such a missile might hit Poland, given the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I must say that Polish authorities and Polish experts and many people here in Poland were and are still very, very extremely cautious about what they say, how they say it, and everyone is still awaiting more facts to come. What we know now is that 2 people are killed, that a Russian-made missile did hit Polish territory, but we still don't know, and Polish authorities emphasize that very much, that we still don't know where this missile came from, and who launched it. And I think it's extremely important to be cautious, because I think everyone is aware that it could blow out of proportions somehow if we are not careful enough. And I think Poland, as much as all NATO allies, also the Americans, are careful so that one word is not spoken too much, and so that we can establish the facts first and then act on it. There is a special North Atlantic Council meeting scheduled for today. Also here in Poland at midday, there will be a National Security Council, urgent meeting of the National Security Council, also organized so that the President, the Prime Minister, ministers, and also the head of the army can talk and also analyze the facts that are being established.
Thank you. Jan, as Magdalena was saying there, this is a time for caution and not overreaction, although I imagine there must be some anger in Poland this morning.
Yes, yesterday's incident is the first case of death of Polish civilians in this brutal war just near our east borders. This missile attack, Polish government, in cooperation with NATO allies, in working on establishing whose missile was it. Now, Mr. President Andrzej Duda, Polish President, Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki are touched with our allies. For example, with President of the United States of America, Mr. Joe Biden, with Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, and now we must waiting for next facts to do something next.
Okay, Magdalena, well, let me ask you, President Duda in Poland, what kind of statement has he made about this? Who is he looking for support from?
Well, I believe as much as President Duda, as much as all other Polish authorities are, I think, very happy about the support from all NATO allies. I think no decision will be made without consulting NATO allies. And since last night, since yesterday evening, these consultations are ongoing. President Duda spoke with Secretary General of NATO Jens Stoltenberg, with Joe Biden, also with heads of states and governments of many NATO member countries, and this support, this firm support from NATO allies that we hear about is extremely important for Poles, I think Polish ordinary citizens, as much as Polish authorities. What President Duda said last night was that still there are facts to be established, but most probably it was a Russian missile that hit Polish territory. But again, we still need to wait for more facts to be established.
Jan, if I can just ask you, obviously we are here in the UK, we are a long way from the conflict geographically. You guys are living just over the border. Apart from this one particular attack, which, as you say, has taken the lives of 2 people, how else is it affecting daily life in Poland, having the Ukraine-Russia conflict just on the, a matter of miles from where the majority of people will live in Poland?
Firstly, we should remember that we are very big allies of Ukraine. We cooperate with President Zelensky. Every Polish people know that Ukrainian territory, that Ukrainian society is brothers of Polish society. But we should, the most important thing, that we must stop Putin terrorists. We must stop Russian state, which is murders, which is bastards, which is people who's killing civilians in Bucha, in Kherson, in many of Ukrainian cities. And this is now most important thing. In Warsaw, we are safe. In Poland, we are safe. We are part of European Union. We are part of NATO alliance. But now, first thing, helping Ukraine and destroy Russia.
OK, thank you both ever so much for joining me this morning from Poland. Jan Streczek and Magdalena Skajewska there, bringing us the latest. And as you say, we think there will be a press conference this morning, actually, before I'm off air. So we will let you know as soon as we hear that, a NATO press conference. Now, before we go to the break, I want to bring you some breaking news that Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has written to the Prime Minister to request an independent investigation into 2 formal complaints that have been made against him. Tom Harwood is with me now. Bring us up to date, Tom. What's happened?
Yes, well, this is a story that's been bubbling sort of along for the last week or so about the way in which Dominic Raab conducted himself in office, first as Foreign Secretary and then as his first tenure as Justice Secretary under the previous but one government. Now, of course, he's the Deputy Prime Minister, he's the Justice Secretary now, deputising for Rishi Sunak. He'll be standing in at Prime Minister's questions in just a couple of hours' time. And this was a big story that was hanging over him that no doubt the Labour Party would be bringing up, Angela Rayner facing him across the dispatch box at midday today. So this morning, just 2 hours before Prime Minister's questions, he has referred himself to investigation over what he describes as 2 separate complaints that have formally been made against him. He says that he's referred himself to investigation as soon as he has heard of these formal complaints. He notes in his letter that these have been made in parallel and came from his time as Foreign Secretary and first tenure as Justice Secretary. Now, clearly the idea that these complaints have been made today in parallel, he's referring there to something that perhaps, well, maybe these weren't seen to be the most serious things at the time. Maybe there's some politics at play here, perhaps. The civil service and the government haven't always seen eye to eye, and some of the defenders of Dominic Raab would say that he hasn't delivered bullying conduct. He's just asked pretty robust things of the civil service over time. But I suppose the big message from this referring to independent investigation of these complaints is that he'll be able to answer any questions later today with, well, this is being independently investigated, I can't say anything more. But also it does raise the salience of the issue because he has now formally acknowledged it, and that might be trickier down the line.
It might be. I guess he's trying to clear his name and get ahead of it, isn't he, before anybody else does. But thank you, Tom. We will watch that with interest. We'll let you know if we hear anything else on that story. Now, don't forget to vote in our Twitter poll about whether Trump running for office again is a good move. After the break, coffee and papers on the sofa with 3 erudite guests to talk about some very interesting things, particularly one of the stories about the fact that 1/5 of children never went back to school after lockdown. See you in a minute.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Good morning. morning. It is 10:23 on Wednesday morning. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner on GB News. Now, let's look at some of the stories that are making the headlines this morning with my superb panel. Former Brexit Party MP Ben Habib, former detective and Greater Manchester Police and sexual abuse whistleblower Maggie Oliver, and author and academic Joanna Williams. Right, Joanna, let's go to you first. This story is really shocking. It's about how many children didn't go back to the classroom after lockdown. What's happened?
So this is a new report which is published today by the Centre for Social Justice, and it shows the true extent of children missing from school post-pandemic, or should we say really post-lockdown. And it's a fifth of all children. We're talking really phenomenal numbers here. 2 million out of 9 million children are either persistently truanting or are being recorded as home educated, which could mean anything. No doubt some of them are being really well educated at home, but no doubt others are not. And I think this should alarm us. I mean, this is really troubling, because without school, these children are missing out on their education, they're missing out on life chances, opportunities for all kinds of social interaction.
Ben, where's he gone?
Well, I mean, it's a remarkable story, isn't it? We now know, we're beginning to see the damage lockdowns have done. We know it was lockdowns that broke the economy. It wasn't the war in Ukraine, that came afterwards. We know lockdowns broke the health service. And now we're beginning to see tangible evidence of lockdowns having affected the young. We all said that actually COVID was a disease that affected the elderly most, but it's the young that are going to pay the price. And we see that, not just in, by the way, these figures that have been released today, but in mental health issues as well. There's a big swathe of 25 to 35-year-olds who are not getting into the workforce, who've got rising mental health issues and have effectively absented themselves from society. And that's what lockdowns did. They broke society. And if there's any message to take away from this, is we must never, ever lock down again.
Maggie, so 1.67 million children are classified by the Department of Education as persistently absent during the autumn of 2021, an increase of 82% on the previous year. With your safeguarding hat on, this must make your blood run cold.
You know, Bev, for me, the one thing that jumps out at me is that the children that are not in school are the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And, you know, teachers are one of the safety nets for those children. And the ones that, there will be some that are being home educated, but there will be a vast majority of these that are living in circumstances in homes where they are not being cared for, where they are at risk of abuse, and they will go missing off the radar. There is a massive shortage of educational welfare officers, and if they are not registered in schools, they won't even come up on that radar. So we will be seeing in a few years' time children that are abused, that have died. We'll get another, you know, public inquiry into why did this happen, and it's exactly for that reason. It needs addressing now, and not being left, you know, to chance.
I think that's the problem. We haven't really had a proper reckoning with the devastating impact of lockdown. One statistic that really jumps out at me from this article here in the Telegraph today is it says that British schools closed down for the second longest in Europe. It was only Italy that closed their schools for longer. Now, as far as I'm concerned, we haven't had a proper explanation as to why that was the case. I mean, was COVID worse here than it was in France or Belgium or Germany? Clearly not. No. And yet our schools remained closed for longer. It seems to me that our government was running scared of the teaching unions. Now, we need to be told that that was the case. You know, we had the unions persistently pushing back every time it was announced that schools were going to reopen. And every step of the way, our government just relinquished and just gave in to them and kept schools closed for longer. And now we're reaping the consequences. There's kind of talk of amnesty. Well, they don't get my forgiveness, I'm afraid.
No, quite. And of course, the COVID inquiry originally, the terms of reference didn't even include the effect on children. It was the hard work of people like Molly Kingsley at Us For Them who fought to have them recognised. I think there should be a whole section, there should be a whole independent COVID inquiry into the effects on children and young people of what we've done in the last 2 years.
Absolutely. Sorry, one other tiny thing is that we're kind of got these statistics here showing how many children are missing from school, and that's really good because at least we've got some objective measure of what's been missing. What concerns me is the educational loss, because we've seen a lot of grade inflation, and what that means is that children are getting a pat on the the back, you know, and a certificate with a letter A on it or something like that if they're good. But that covers up, it actually hides what children are missing. We've just inflated the grades, we've given them the certificates, we've kept everyone happy, but we've not had that reckoning with the learning that children have lost as well.
And the other thing is, you know, that you've got the figures there, but the very vulnerable will not be in those figures. You know, that won't be the full picture.
Yeah, I'm sure. Right, Maggie, on to your story if we can. Suffolk Police have published victims' information in a mass data breach. What's happened?
Yet another failure in really tech. You know, for me, this is partly human error. It's my personal fear of everything being on a technical system because human error will always occur. But my background in policing, I worked in major crime, Bev, and I dealt with witness protection and very, very vulnerable people, as are many of those that we help in the foundation. But, you know, somebody who goes into witness protection might be a witness to a murder, a gang-related murder, and once their address and their name is out there, you know, their whole lives fall apart. And, you know, you hear the Police and Crime Commissioner saying here, you know, that if people are re-traumatised, we will look after them and, you know, think about your well-being. Well, you know,
what does that even look like?
What does that even mean? Absolutely. It will never be able to be put right for some of these people. Words and promises are meaningless. And I think it undermines trust again in policing. But this will have been human error. I have no doubt. And the problem is that, you know, there's a lack of training with young police officers. They are not properly equipped. They are probably overworked. They probably don't have a clue what they're doing. And GMP, for instance, went in special measures a couple of years ago. And that was because their system was completely unfit for purpose. And in 1 year alone, more than 80,000 serious crimes were not recorded on the system. So all these things are linked up, Bev. But the losers are the most vulnerable, who now have had their lives put at risk.
Their homes and addresses put on the police website. Victims
Unbelievable.
Of sexual abuse.
You know, you can't put it right.
The response from the police force was that they take data protection very seriously.
Well, I'm sorry.
I mean, that is totally underestimated.
Absolutely.
And the problem is we don't know who's taken a screenshot of this data, for example, and where it's been circulated now.
It was I should say some of the most vulnerable people rendered even more vulnerable by a combination of too much tech and human error. Ben, universities. Tell us about, I mean, you kind of read these stories now about universities being ordered to go woke. What's going on?
I mean, I think to say universities are going woke is to underestimate how pernicious and damaging what's going on in our tertiary education establishments is. And what we've got here, actually, is a full-blooded attack on British values and our heritage. And it's deliberate. It's designed to make us lose confidence in ourselves as a nation and to foist on us a new ideology which inculcates division between ethnic minorities, between white people and ethnic minorities, between different religious beliefs, and it also promotes at the same time this sense of victimhood. You know, like the whole world suffered because of British imperial past.
So what's happening is that their curriculum is being told to decolonise courses. So it's a quality assurance agency. Apparently, it's voluntary, technically voluntary, but as we know, people feel forced to do certain things these days, don't they, under the guise of just doing the right thing, whether it is the right thing or not. And they have said that they have to teach a range of courses that will include topics about white supremacy, when we talk about colonialism, and critics say that the advice is anti-white, is anti-Western, and new instructions on equality, diversity and inclusion.
You know, Bev, for me, I mean, for me, university should be all about encouraging critical thinking, independent thinking, and once you start to mix financing a university with the message that university has to teach, we are in very serious circumstances. You know, I loved uni because it allowed you to explore different ideas.
You're absolutely right.
The other
it's about,
side.
and Joanna, just briefly, because we're going to move on, but it's about I feel like students now must feel they have to close their mind rather than expand them.
Absolutely. I mean, this is completely antithetical to academic freedom, because as soon as you've got something like this coming from a regulating authority, it makes it very difficult for lecturers and students to be critical of this message. But you think, for me, the beauty of maths is that it's objective. 2 + 2 is 4. And it doesn't matter what your skin colour is, doesn't matter where in the world you are, that is a mathematical fact. So what's happening is that these degrees are being politicised in a very divisive, and I think you're absolutely right, very pernicious way, very ugly way. That's completely unnecessary and actually goes against academic freedom and actually against education.
And I feel really sorry for the students who want to maybe see the world in a slightly different way or with an open mind, and they're not allowed. We've got to move on, guys, but I'm going to be talking to you in just a moment. Now, after the break, how do we make our roads more harmonious for both cyclists and motorists? This shocking footage has emerged online of an SUV crushing a bicycle to get it out of the way, nearly crushing the owner as well. We're going to get stuck into that after your morning news.
Good morning, 10:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, has written to the Prime Minister requesting an independent investigation following allegations of poor conduct towards junior colleagues. The inquiry would look into 2 formal complaints that have been made about Mr Raab's behaviour. He won't be stepping down from his post as Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor if an investigation takes place. Mr Raab will be facing scrutiny in the Commons today, though, at Prime Minister's questions, when he stands in for Rishi Sunak. The Prime Minister has said it's important to remain calm to establish the facts after a missile hit Poland, killing 2 people yesterday. Rishi Sunak has joined an emergency meeting of G7 and NATO leaders at the G20 summit in Bali. The US president has said it's unlikely that Russia fired the missile. A statement backed by US intelligence suggested the missile was fired by Ukrainian forces at an incoming Russian one. Mr Sunak said it's important not to rush to conclusions.
Yesterday, Russia rained down over 80 missile strikes on the Ukrainians, on civilian infrastructure, electricity, water and such like. That's why we're having this conversation, and we can't lose sight of that fact. But we will get to the bottom of what happened, and that's what the teams are doing as we speak.
Inflation rose to 11.1% last month. The ONS says that's up from 10.1% in September. They've said rising gas and electricity prices, as well as increasing food prices, has driven inflation to its highest level for over 40 years. Donald Trump has announced that he will be running to be President of the United States. He lost the job to Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential race. Mr Trump's aides have filed paperwork for his 2024 White House bid. This announcement comes after the Republicans failed to win as many seats in Congress in the midterms as they'd hoped. We're on your TV, online, DAB+ radio. It's GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it's 10:38. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. You've been sending in your views. Please keep them coming. gbviews@gbnews.uk on any of the topics we've been talking about this morning. Let me know what you think about that statistic about a fifth of all children not returning to school after the pandemic. Maybe you're just a homeschooling parent watching this and going, well, my children are better off now that we're at home. So do let me know that as well, won't you? You've been talking about the Donald Trump presidency. We have a Twitter poll running on that this morning to find out whether you think it's a good idea that he stands or not. Even if you're a Republican voter, you might think that his day has been and he should step aside and let some newcomers through. Tomo has said on Twitter, can't see Trump succeeding after seeing what happened in the midterms. Porcus has said, big mistake. The Republican Party should give DeSantis a chance. And Trump running is fantastic news for the Democrats. Somebody else has said, and it was hardly a shock that he announced he was running again. He was never going to sit this one out, was he? No, he probably wasn't, actually, Dan, on Twitter. He wasn't necessarily going to sit it out, but still having his official announcement is significant. And other people saying, you know, I actually like Trump. I hope he wins the presidency. It seems as if Trump has unfinished business to complete, and so on. As I say, get involved in our Twitter poll to say whether you support him getting involved, regardless of where you sit politically. But as I said, Donald Trump is back.
I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
He will run for the presidency in 2024, vowing America's comeback starts right now. We are going to be asking, so Donald Trump, is he what America needs? And here to debate this, I'm joined by Paul Doddridge, host of the Politics People podcast, and Aaron Fishbone from Democrats Abroad. Good morning, gentlemen, if you are there. They will be here in just a minute. Paul Doddridge and Aaron Fishbone. They will be with us in just a moment.
Hello, hello, hello.
There we go. Hello, guys. How are you? Thank you for bearing with us. So, first of all, if I can come to you, Paul, it wasn't exactly a shock, but what is your immediate reaction to this news?
Well, it's 2:40 a.m. here in Los Angeles, and I've just been up all night celebrating. So I'm very, very pleased at the news that Donald Trump is going for the hat trick and looking to win the presidency for the third time. And we're just hoping that the Democrats actually let him take office this time.
So why is it good news then, Paul? Tell us. Come on, make the case.
Well, nobody unites the populist vote like Donald Trump. DeSantis, all very well. People can love DeSantis, but DeSantis is a politician. And Donald Trump is the king of the populist politicians, if you like. He's not even a Republican, to be fair. He's not a Democrat. He is a vote for the little guy against the establishment. And this is what you actually need at this point in the United States, is Donald Trump to come and finish the business that he started and, frankly, wasn't allowed to continue in 2020. But he unites populist, conservative politics greater than any leader in the world to date.
Aaron, it's fair to say, obviously, he's an incredibly divisive figure. As a Democrat, I take it you might have mixed feelings about him standing.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say my feelings are mixed at all. They're pretty clear. He should not run again. I mean, you know, your previous segment said that he lost the election to Joe Biden in 2020 by almost 9 million popular votes. So just to correct the record based on what Paul said there. But no, I mean, and it's really noteworthy that after the midterm elections, which were largely a repudiation of his platform, everything he stands for, and his selected candidates, that he feels like he should actually put himself forward again. And he never really stepped out of it. I mean, he endorsed a lot of candidates who ultimately lost Americans voted to extend health care protections to people. They voted against political violence, against hateful rhetoric, which is exactly what he espoused. So, it was pretty much a drubbing of anything that he would run on and the type of grievance politics he stands for. No, look, there's a lot to do in the world. We need to keep doing what we're doing in order to get out of this inflation and address it, extend healthcare protections to people. And so Trump running to sort of put himself back in the center, as it were, again, is a big mistake. But look, I can understand it. He is extending, he has multiple court cases against him. So he's trying to do this largely in order to protect himself as a legal defense strategy.
Except, Aaron, the reason I say you might have conflicted feelings about it is that you've got Ron DeSantis as an alternative who does not come with the negativity of baggage of Trump. He's more likely to win over the middle classes. Surely that would be worse for you as a Democrat.
Well, look, I mean, who's going to be the Republican nominee for president is still very much to be determined. I mean, sure, Ron DeSantis is doing very well in Florida in terms of electoral politics. He's never been tested on the national stage before. I mean, there's any number of, let's say, successful governors who've gone on to stumble and not ultimately win their party's nominations or not succeed nationally. So I do think it's premature. And also that's something for the Republicans to figure out who's going to be their nominee, not something I really have to say. What I can say is the Democrats have a lot to run on. We've had a number of major legislative successes, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the bipartisan gun reform legislation, the Inflation Recovery Act, and all of those, are just huge successes that the Democrats have to run on.
But Biden is just an embarrassment, isn't he, Paul?
Yes, he's an embarrassment. Trump has been a more powerful, effective politician whilst he's actually been on the golf course than Joe Biden's been in the White House. So the idea that the midterms are repudiation of Trump, the stats just don't bear that out at all. 232 of Trump's endorsed candidates actually won. He only had 22 losses. The fact of the matter is the midterms were lost on the repeal of Roe v. Wade. You had Make America Great Again voters in certain states actually voting Democrat because they were going to uphold abortion laws.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that the first comment that Biden made after the results of the midterms was that he wasn't going to be able to do anything on abortion. And so abortion is going to be the main political football, if you like, that decides this election in 2024. The Democrats have no intention of codifying Roe v. Wade, which would just make it law. They could just make it law, but they've decided not to because they want to fight on this because they know it's a vote winner. This is not a repudiation of Trump. The fact is, DeSantis might be wonderful, but nobody has the level of recognition that Trump has. I would not be up at 2:40 in the morning talking to anybody about DeSantis announcing. That's going to be a given. And so Trump is still American politics.
Well, we've still got a couple of years to go, of course, until the election. It'll be interesting to see where we go in that time and how the public respond when they get to know more about Ron DeSantis as opposed to just the Floridians at the moment. Let me ask you both about Trump's performance with his announcement, Paul. Has he lost a bit of his sparkle?
I didn't think he'd lost his sparkle. I found him to be slightly less boisterous, more sedate. I think he was definitely aiming to be a little bit more conciliatory and more uniting. Remember, he's now fighting the Republican Party. The Republican Party represents the establishment. They're just another wing of the same party. And so he's trying not to tread on anybody's toes now. So what we saw was, I don't know if you watched it, but I found him to be very, very sort of gentle. He almost said, look, I'm not even going to say fake news. You know, it's like
whilst saying fake news and reminding us what he ran on last time. But you're right. Exactly. I mean, maybe conciliatory and uniting, Aaron. That's not really words that we associate with Trump traditionally. Can he maintain that illusion that is his personality?
Well, I don't think that is his personality in the first place, so I don't think there's any illusion to maintain. And again, I think the American people have just shown that they don't want that either. They repudiated all of his significant nominees for Secretary of State candidates who were carrying forward his false claims that the election was somehow stolen, despite the fact that it was certified in many cases by Republican canvassing boards. They repudiated his desire to overturn healthcare protections for people. They, in fact, encouraged his. So I think there's any number of issues, and they repudiated most of his senatorial candidates. And it's funny too that he inserted himself in and is stepping on the foot of the Georgia Senate race, which is now going to a runoff. So I think all of that is just negative for both Donald Trump and for the Republican now nominee in Georgia, Herschel Walker, who has to go up against the incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock. So look, I think that I think the election was, in fact, a complete repudiation of his platform, his grievance politics, his hate-filled rhetoric. It's not the kind of politics or the kind of policymaking that Democrats want to see, and clearly that American general electoral votes, the majority of Americans, want to see. We want to look forward, not backwards. We know Joe Biden was a democratically elected candidate president. We know that Trump wasn't, and we want to move forward.
Paul, we're living in a post-pandemic world now, and when the next election comes around, who knows how far that will be in the memories of the American people. But how do you think that will have affected how they view Trump? That change of political landscape, the reverberations from the lockdown policies, etc. Will that benefit Trump?
Yes, you say that we're post-pandemic, but actually the White House flip-flops as to when we will be out of the pandemic. They're still looking at February, March next year to officially end absolutely everything. Yeah. My children are still at schools with masks. So we'll wait for former Vice President Joe Biden to let us know whether the pandemic's officially over. No, that level of narrative can't hurt Trump at all. He took the vaccine, he publicly took the vaccine, and he has spoken about the fact that everything should be on the choice of the individual. So, but in 2 years' time, I don't see that being an election issue at all for any candidate, whoever actually gets the Republican nomination.
Aaron, can I just quickly ask you one brief question? Where's Kamala Harris gone? She seems to have disappeared, particularly from British news output. Where is she? Is she on the telly much in America?
Yeah, well, I also live overseas, so I'm seeing her out on the world stage quite a bunch. If you ask if she's not on the British telly, I mean, maybe that's that's your role to cover what she's doing. But with the 50-50 Senate as well, she also had to preside over a lot of important votes. So, therefore, I heard she was in the Senate a lot more than maybe other vice presidents have been. Nonetheless, she's in Indonesia for the G20, and she traveled to Central America quite a bit. She traveled around the country hosting, outreach and engagement work around voting rights and voting enfranchisement. So she's out there doing a lot. And recently she was out there touting some of the recent investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. So you can certainly follow her and find out what she's doing. And I would encourage you to, feature her a bit more.
OK, both. Thank you so much, guys. Paul Doddridge and Aaron Fishbone there discussing the fact that Trump has now officially made the announcement that we all knew was coming, but has now put his name there on the stamp, on the ballot to hopefully, maybe, in his opinion, get the nomination for the 2024 election. Now, moving on, a video has surfaced this week of a driver attacking a cyclist and destroying his bicycle in London. Let's have a quick look. So for those of you listening on the radio, this is on a busy London street. It's in Kilburn, and it's a big black SUV, which basically just ploughs into a bicycle and almost takes out its cyclist as well. I mean, these kind of things just seem to be happening all the time, don't they? It was a £47,000 Jaguar. Called it a black car. I'm afraid I get instant car blindness and I don't know one from the other. The cyclist jumped out of the way. Luckily, nobody was hurt. But joining me now is race car driver and motoring journalist, and somebody who does not get instant car blindness, Amanda Stretton, and also the cycling vigilante, Dave Sherry. Thank you both so much for coming on. Dave, what's your feelings when you see footage like that?
Shouldn't be happening. New highway code says vulnerable road users, you can't be using your vehicle as a weapon. Drivers have got duty of care, and that's why they have insurance. I'm not sure the insurance company's going to pay out due to his negligence, do you?
So tell us what you do, Dave. You go around, call yourself the cycling vigilante. You do what? Try to call out bad drivers?
Yeah, I call out bad drivers. I'm a professional driver myself, London bus driver. I've been for 20 years. I I seem to have no issues with vulnerable road users. And basically, I've been hit by a HGV, uninsured, and certain other incidents where I've had bikes destroyed. Been left permanently disabled from the HGV one. I basically turn the tables. I use video evidence to bring the drivers to court. Sometimes they retaliate and make false allegations, and then, things have to pan out. They have a duty of care. They got a driving licence. They got a duty of responsibility to other road users. And if they fail and want to use their vehicles like weapons, they're going to get done for more than dangerous driving, I would have thought.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry to hear that you were hurt, Dave. Amanda, if I can come to you, as a motorist, for me it feels most of the time, despite incidents like this, the cyclists have won. Our road networks now are being designed to accommodate cyclists and to make life very difficult for motorists. Is that your take on it?
It's a really tricky and very sensitive topic, and I'm sure it's going to be very divisive, depending on who you ask. But you're right. And I think the one point that I would stress here is that we haven't seen the first half of that video. So we don't know what actually happened in the first instance. Now, it could be, and I'm not suggesting that it is, that the cyclist was abusing or shouting abuse. I'm not saying it is right what the Jaguar driver did by any stretch of the imagination, but you just don't know how this all started. And so I think it's wrong to always assume that the motorist is at fault and the cyclist has no responsibility or culpability for the sequence of events. What I would say is that there is absolutely no circumstance whatsoever where behaviour like that by a motorist against a vulnerable road user is appropriate.
No, absolutely. But Dave, just returning to my point, though, do you think that the roads now are safer for cyclists? Because I sit in traffic jams all day in London at the moment, and mainly because there are huge cycle lanes behind me with a couple of bikes on them.
Well, my opinion is things have improved, and that's only because of the new highway code changes. Cycle lanes look good, but they're not really safe to use. You be safe on the road. Things are improved. Drivers' mentality towards pedestrians and other vulnerable road users has changed. Things like this, where people are using their vehicles as weapons, I was thinking to myself, well, say it wasn't a cyclist. What would have happened if that was a pedestrian who had a little bit of argy-bargy and a bit of road rage? It's not acceptable. Things are improving. Things are moving forward, but just rest assured, vulnerable road users only get one chance. People in cars have got ABS, airbags, the lot, yeah, then they're not going to die outright. They're not going to be left disabled. They're not going to be left in a wheelchair. This is where we got to understand the vulnerability aspect, and that is we're not in ABS or bull bars or any of that. We are flesh and blood. And bones and stuff. So if we get hit by a 2-ton vehicle, you're not going to get up. Trust me, once where I was hit by the HGV, I've never been the same since. And to be honest, I had all the safety equipment on and everything. And the only thing that actually saved me was my body armour. So all I say is don't be using your vehicles as weapons, and that individual will have his day in court because it's on camera, and like the other person
we
said.
Must absolutely, and we must try to make roads a little bit more harmonious. Thank you both. I'm sorry it was short and sweet. Amanda Stretton, their motoring journalist, and Dave Sherry, the cycling vigilante. That is the end of the first hour. I'm going to be right back with a very short break for the weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Plenty going on again today. Many places fine and dry with sunny spells. There are a few showers around. Well, looking at some wet weather, especially across southern England later today, created by this little set of weather fronts moving in from the southwest. Notice how close the isobars are across Shetland. It is going to be a very, very windy afternoon here. Blustery conditions with outbreaks of rain. A few showers scattered about elsewhere, parts of northeast England, maybe the east of Northern Ireland, and down to the southeast too. But here comes the more persistent rain. That's going to be turning quite heavy across the southwest. The winds will also pick up here. But as I said, the strongest winds across Shetland. Temperatures generally around about average, maybe a touch above across the south. Certainly a little cooler
than it was for much of last week. Now, that wet weather works its way across the south and into the Midlands, parts of Wales. And heavy rain across the far southeast, where we've seen a lot of rain recently, could cause some disruption. So we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. The rain eases from here through the night, but then lingers over northeast England and eastern Scotland. The skies clear in Northern Ireland. Parts to the west may see a touch of frost. On to Thursday's weather, and for some across eastern England, eastern Scotland, a very, very wet day with the winds just coming in from the North Sea. It's not going to feel very pleasant at all. At times that rain will affect northwest England and North Wales, where again it could be heavy. So again, the potential for this rain as it lingers to cause a bit of disruption during the course of the day. Those brisk winds off the North Sea bringing a cold feel, I suspect. Temperatures mostly about average, just about getting into double figures. But a brighter day across the southwest, just a few showers here. That rain continues to come into eastern Scotland, northeast England and North Wales during Thursday evening. Friday sees more rain across the northeast, otherwise turning a bit drier and brighter into the weekend, at least to start with, before more rain arrives later on Saturday.
The Chancellor has a problem. He's got £55 billion to find, and it could soon become your problem too. Tax rises and cuts could be coming, but where will the axe fall? Benefits and pensions, support for energy bills, or social care? To find out what it means for you and your family, the Chancellor's autumn statement, live here on GB News tomorrow from 10 a.m.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining Bev Turner today on GB News. It is 11:01 on Wednesday morning. Before midday, we're going to get to the bottom of NATO. This fact that NATO are holding an emergency meeting after Russian missiles hit Poland yesterday. We're going to be bringing you that later on in the show. I've got a great panel as well with me today. You've all been getting in touch with your views. We were talking about the fact that a fifth of children never went back to school after the pandemic. And Julia said, I'm glad your guest has mentioned the teachers' unions. It's not referred to enough. Teaching unions were vital all the way through the pandemic. And Jane says, I don't think COVID is entirely to blame. Perhaps parents don't appreciate large class sizes and believe their children are better off homeschooled. It might also be important to consider bullying and how this is influencing them. A lot of you actually, surprisingly, defending parents' reasons for not sending their kids back to school. We've got that and much, much more in the next hour. But first of all, here's the news.
Good morning, 2 minutes past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister has agreed to Dominic Raab's request for an independent investigation into allegations about his conduct, saying integrity, professionalism and accountability are the core values of this government. The inquiry would look into 2 formal complaints that have been made about Mr Raab's behaviour towards junior colleagues. He won't be stepping down from his post as Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor if an investigation takes place. But Mr Raab will face scrutiny in the Commons at Prime Minister's questions today when he stands in for Rishi Sunak. The Prime Minister has said it's important to remain calm and establish the facts after a missile hit a farm in Poland, killing 2 people. Rishi Sunak was part of an emergency meeting of G7 and NATO leaders at the G20 summit in Bali. The US president has said it's unlikely Russia fired the missile. US intelligence sources have suggested the missile may have been fired by Ukrainian forces. Russia's denied any involvement and says some countries have made baseless claims, but it welcomed restraint shown by President Biden. Mr Sunak also warned it's important not to rush to conclusions.
Yesterday, Russia rained down over 80 missile strikes on the Ukrainians, on civilian infrastructure, electricity, water and such like. That's why we're having this conversation, and we can't lose sight of that fact. But we will get to the bottom of what happened, and that's what the teams are doing as we speak.
The rate of consumer prices index inflation rose to 11.1% last month. The ONS says that's up from 10.1% in September. They said rising gas and electricity prices, as well as increasing food prices, has driven inflation to its highest level in over 40 years. Royal Naval Shipbuilding is returning to Belfast with a new site pledging to create 2,000 UK jobs. The MOD have commissioned the building of 3 support ships in a contract worth £1.6 billion. Each vessel will measure the length of 2 Premier League football pitches, and their final assembly will take place at a shipyard in Belfast. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, says it will be a significant boost to the UK shipbuilding industry. Prince William is in Cardiff to strengthen the links with the devolved nation. It's the first time he's visited since becoming the Prince of Wales. Well, our royal reporter Cameron Walker is there for us. Cameron, good morning. The Prince is aiming to learn more about Wales. Tell us more.
Yes, Rosie. Well, the Prince of Wales is very much committed to deepening the trust and respect for the people of Wales. We got a sense of that, actually, as soon as royal mourning ended when he visited Anglesey with the Princess of Wales. But today is all about Welsh politics and meeting Welsh politicians, present politicians, yes, but also politicians of the future by visiting the Welsh Youth Parliament here at the Senedd. Now, as we understand it, Kensington Palace reiterated today that there are no plans for a formal investiture ceremony with Prince William, unlike in 1969 with the former Prince of Wales, now King Charles. But they do want to support Welsh language and culture in the future, but I understand there is no rush to do so, and they very much want to reflect the values of 2022 rather than 1952 when Queen Elizabeth II ascended to the throne.
Cameron, thank you very much. Now, the Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey's been charged by the Crown Prosecution Service with a further 7 sex offences. The charges relate to the same individual between 2001 and 2004, and they include sexual and indecent assault. Kevin Spacey previously denied 5 prior allegations relating to 3 men at the Old Bailey in July of this year. It was third time lucky for NASA. After 2 previous failed attempts, Artemis 1 made liftoff this morning.
And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
The crewless rocket blasted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida early this morning for a 3-week test journey around the moon and back. It's all part of NASA's plans to return astronauts to the lunar surface as early as 2025. Well, meanwhile, here in the UK, the Civil Aviation Authority has awarded an operating licence to Spaceport in Cornwall in Newquay, enabling it to host the UK's first space launch. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, Rishi Sunak has addressed the G20 summit in Bali, warning that the UK's economic and security crisis will not end unless the war in Ukraine comes to a close. Well, this comes as inflation hits a staggering 11%. I'm going to be joined in the studio by our brilliant economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, to unpick that a little. And world leaders are set to hold more emergency talks. It's a good job they're all in Bali this morning amid rising global tensions after a missile landed in Poland, killing 2 people. Russia has denied responsibility for the blast. So is now the time to bolster our defences here in the UK? I'm going to be joined by a former NATO commander later on. And as always, I'm going to be joined again in a moment by my fantastic commentators. About 20 minutes time for analysis and debate of the day's biggest stories, including the news that has just broken while we've been on air about Dominic Raab asking for an investigation into complaints against him. More of your thoughts, please, of course, GBViews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at GBNews to give your opinion on all of our stories. Now, just before the break, I brought you some breaking news that Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has written to the Prime Minister to request an independent investigation into 2 former complaints that have been made against him. And joining me now, live from Westminster, is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, to bring us the latest. Tom, what is going on with Dominic Raab? It looks like he's trying to get ahead of these complaints, isn't he?
Yes, it certainly does. This is a story that has been rumbling for several days now, where some journalists in parts of the media have been pushing this story about the alleged bullying accusations of Dominic Raab. Of course, no formal complaints had been lodged against him, however, and so the response that we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday was that he didn't recognise this account of Dominic Raab and he hadn't heard of any formal complaints. Similarly, Dominic Raab had been saying there had been no formal complaints. Well, that has changed this morning. Around an hour ago, Dominic Raab released a statement saying he had just been informed of 2 simultaneous formal complaints being lodged against him, one from his time as Foreign Secretary and one from his first time as Justice Secretary. Now, some people may raise an eyebrow as to why these 2 complaints have been submitted about different incidents from different times simultaneously. Is there politics at play here, or is it simply because the salience of the issue has risen? Whatever the answer, Dominic Raab has said that he has now referred himself for investigation with regard to these new formal complaints, and that he looks forward to clearing his name. Importantly, he will continue in his role as Justice Secretary and indeed as Deputy Prime Minister while this investigation is carried out.
Tom, what do we know about the detail of these allegations? Because presumably if there is an inquiry, we might find out a little more. What do we know already?
Yes, it's interesting because so far what we've heard in terms of what's been out there in the media, what's been leaked to the press, are rather trivial anecdotes about throwing a piece of tomato, but also about the general tone in which, in the way in which Dominic Raab spoke. Now, these seem relatively trivial and not perhaps the basis for formal complaints. We don't yet know what these formal complaints entail in and of themselves. No doubt we will find that out as time moves forward. But this is an opportunity now to deal in the specific rather than in these general accusations of, oh, you spoke a bit sharply or the tone was a bit wrong there. Now there will be obviously some specifics behind these complaints, an opportunity for us to have a bit more light on this situation, because as things stand, Dominic Raab has been able to say, well, there haven't been these terribly specific complaints brought forward against him. Now there have. These will come out in due course, and there will be a more reasoned discussion, a more analytical discussion as to whether how Dominic Raab behaved could be conceived as bullying or otherwise.
OK, thank you very much, Tom. Tom Harwood there down at Westminster. UK inflation has jumped to a 41-year high of 11.1% due to surging energy bills and the price of food. This will not be welcome news for the Chancellor, who's going to deliver the government's autumn budget tomorrow. I just really want to talk about the budget. But first of all, Liam Halligan's here. Do you know Dominic Raab? What's he like?
I do know Dominic Raab, yeah. He came to Parliament very much from a legal background, a corporate background. He's got a reputation as a minister who wants to get things done.
Does he get things done by throwing tomatoes across the room? Does he have that reputation? Because some politicians do, don't they?
They do. Some of all parties, some politicians have that reputation. I don't know in the case of Dominic Raab, I wasn't in the room. He, of course, denies it. What I would say, though, is that a lot of the public will be looking on and thinking, in all workplaces, people sometimes raise their voice. Maybe these civil servants are a bit closeted, a bit distanced from the real world, working from home, very much determined to protect their own rights. Maybe they've got a political agenda. Of course, just as Dominic Raab would deny wrongdoing, so would the unnamed civil servants.
Oh, well, it could be. This is what he obviously feels quite confident. Call for the inquiry himself, maybe. He obviously thinks it's going to get him off the hook. Anyway, should we talk about the economy?
I think we should, because I think in the end, this is what really matters to ordinary people. It's their household budgets. It's making ends meet, and it's just become more difficult to make ends meet because, as you said, inflation in October hit 11.1%. What that means is that, according to the Office for National Statistics, they look at all prices across the economy. Life was 11.1% more expensive in October this year compared to October last year. Now, a lot of people would say that's a sick joke. My life's a lot more than 11.1% more expensive. The price of petrol is up 25, 30%, diesel even more if you drive a van or a taxi or something, and the price of food is also much higher. In fact, the Office for National Statistics acknowledges that food price inflation is 16.1% up over the last year. That's a 45-year high. I would say, again, for people at the sharp end, people on lower incomes, people on benefits, the kind of foods they tend to buy, the price of living's actually gone up a lot more than that.
Oh,
Bev.
easily more than that. I think you know what I mean? Like my top-up shop that I might do in the middle of the week for the kids, fresh milk, bit of bread, cereal, it's gone from what was routinely about 30 quid, and it's easily 55, 60 quid.
Yeah.
And I'm looking...
And that's before you put the bottle of gin in, right?
Well... I wasn't going to mention that, but yeah, I've bought a bulk load of that. The garage.
All right,
I've planned ahead. I've got my priorities right. But these things are quite clearly just everyday items, not the flash stuff. Your jar of coffee, like I say, your milk, your pasta.
There's also this other phenomenon, shrinkflation, where you're getting less stuff for a similar price. That's another way. You can't do that with a pint of milk or measures that we know well. A lot of people would say that the move to metric, it's an old argument, of course, has made it easier because while you know what, a kilo, while you know what sort of 8 pounds feels like, you don't necessarily know what 325 grams feels like. You mentioned in your introduction there that this is due to the price of energy, this inflation. It's partly due to the price of energy, Bev, but if that energy price cap hadn't come in at the beginning of this month, limiting the average bill, average usage to £2,500 a year, which is still massive. If that energy price cap hadn't have come in at the beginning of October, then rather than 11.1%, the ONS says that inflation would have been 13.8%, so even higher.
Has it peaked now?
Well, that's an interesting point. A lot of people are saying it's peaked because they don't want the Bank of England to raise interest rates by too much. I'd like to say that I think it's peaked, but I don't think I'd be being honest with you or GB News viewers and listeners. Why don't I think it's peaked? I don't think it's peaked, Bev, because if you dig down into the Office for National Statistics fine print, we're talking here about the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. There's another much less well-known measure that's very, very instructive called the PPI, which is the Producer Price Index. This is a basket of services, labour, inputs that firms pay for in order to make the stuff, provide the services that they then sell us. The PPI, Bev, in October 2022 compared to October 2021 was 19.2% higher. That is how much higher average input costs are for firms. And talk to the brewers, talk to the hospitality industry. Their costs have gone up by far more than that even. In fact, if you think about how much it costs to produce a pint of beer at the moment and serve it in a pub with heating, with the price of barley, grain, with the cost of the fuel to make the beer and to get it to the pub, to put it in the glass, to put it on the bar so you can drink it, brewers tell me they'd be charging £10 or £11 a pint if they were really passing on all the costs. And of course, They can't do that because that would be completely prohibitive for almost everybody to go to the pub.
Do you know, we've got this budget special tomorrow. We're calling it a budget. It's not strictly a budget, is it? It's an autumn
It's an
statement.
autumn statement.
But we've got this budget special tomorrow, and it will be in your very capable hands, Liam, here on GB News. But we were looking for people this week to come on and discuss this budget. We could find loads of people that would criticise Jeremy Hunt's plans. And when we were looking for people who might support them, we were having to go to the left, the political left, to find people who would say a high taxation at this point is a good idea. How is this in any way a Conservative plan?
Well, that's why I think there's going to be a big backlash against this autumn statement. We seem to have moved from a situation where the Conservatives were about trying to restrain the size of the state while providing for the most vulnerable so you could keep taxes down, so you could encourage enterprise and hard work so people keep more of their money. What we're going to see tomorrow is a massive array of stealth taxes where allowances are frozen, people are dragged into top-rate tax brackets, inheritance tax thresholds are kept where they are. It's harder to understand. I'll be explaining more tomorrow because the headline rate of tax won't change. But it will mean that the tax burden, the share of the economy taken by tax, already a 70-year high, Bev, is going to go up even more. We're going to have 36, 37% of what we call our GNP, all the transactions in the economy, accounted for by tax. And I, for one, don't believe, going beyond my sort of reporter role, I don't think you can tax your way out of a slowdown.
Who's it for then? Who is it for? Who is going to be impressed by this budget?
Well, I think Jeremy Hunt says he's got to take tough decisions, but it's easier to tell, hard-working families who stand up for themselves, the middle classes, if you like, the squeezed middle, a lot of GB News viewers and listeners, it's easier to tell them they're going to pay more tax than it is to tell, people across, NHS doctors or other public sector employees that maybe we've got to spend a bit less money, like public sector pensions, for instance. We spend millions, tens of millions of pounds each year. They've racked up a huge multi-billion pound liability. To tackle those vested interests is much, much harder than just to tell people who don't complain most of the time they're going to pay more tax.
I think it's a very arrogant autumn statement, if I had to sum it up in a word, which doesn't really surprise me.
And it may be counterproductive because if the economy slows because of this extra taxation, we'll get less revenue anyway, Bev, and we'll be deeper in the fiscal hole.
And those Conservative voters that he thinks will just take it on the chin quietly will not, and they will give him, tell him what they think about that in the next election. Right, thank you, Liam Halligan. Lovely to see you, as always. Right, there is still plenty more to come after this quick break. I'm over to the sofa, reintroduce my panel to you. We're going to talk through some of their favourite stories of the day.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip
of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. I'm delighted to say that I'm back here on the sofa, coffee and papers with my fantastic panel. Now, let's look at the stories that are making the headlines. Former MEP Ben Habib is here, former detective and Greater Manchester Police and sexual abuse whistleblower Maggie Oliver, and author and academic Joanna Williams. Let's have a look at these stories. So a story that has broken while we've been on air. Dominic Raab, Ben, I'll come to you. He's written to the Prime Minister. He said he wants to have an independent investigation into 2 formal complaints that have been made against me. What do you think of this?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there are a number of takes on this. First of all, I think it's interesting that it's his first PMQs as Deputy Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's away, and all this started blowing up over the weekend, and now it's come to a head on the morning of PMQs. It almost, I mean, I'm no great fan of this Conservative Party, but it's almost like a stitch-up organised by Labour to weaken Dominic Raab at 12 o'clock today.
But surely the complaints have come from within the Conservative Party, but...
No, I think the complaints have come from the civil service.
From the civil service,
yeah. Working for him.
Right.
My worry about this, sorry to jump in there, Ben, but my worry is that Dominic Raab has done this, put himself forward for an investigation, knowing that he hasn't really done very much, but hoping that this will make the story go away, that he'll be found kind of not guilty, and the story will die down. My worry is that it will have exactly the opposite effect. I mean, the very fact that we're still talking about it now is off the back of him having issued this statement.
And the Deputy Prime Minister being investigated for bullying.
Yeah. I think we have a very low bar for bullying now, though, Maggie.
See, what I see here is every week we've got somebody else. It's a distraction from the real problems that we should be looking at. You know, yes, we had all the Partygate, we've had Dominic Raab. It seems that as soon as there is always going to be somebody to attack everybody, but they are working in government to put the country right, and this is a distraction. And you know what? They're like little kids in the school playground having fallouts. If it's serious bullying and sexual abuse or really serious stuff, let's deal with it. But this, for me, is just somebody who's thrown the teddy out the cot and is a bit fed up.
You're so right, Maggie, because the nation is facing
crisis.
This continuous stream of crises, perma-crises.
Yeah.
And all you ever get at PMQs is Starmer having a crack at some personal behaviour of one of the members of Cabinet.
Yeah.
Sadly, the Cabinet do feed the beast.
Yeah, but I think the country looks at this. People out in the country look at it, and the government have lost the respect of the country. And it's for issues like this that we are in the state we're in. Look at what's going wrong with the country and deal with the big issues.
I think the problem is there is a low bar for bullying. I mean, from what I've heard, not only was there a tomato being thrown into the bin, but Dominic Raab spoke to someone Curtly, well, I'm sorry, if that's the bar for bullying, then, you know, sign me up as a bully.
Every workplace will have somebody
Absolutely.
that can...
Because when you're in a pressurised environment and you're dealing with important issues, yes, you do speak to people curtly because you're in a rush and you want to get things done. But I think the problem is not only have we got a low bar for bullying, we've also now got an activist civil service who actually see their role as they feel put out by having these elected people coming in telling them what to do. They think they know best. They object to being told what to do, and then making political trouble. Well, that's not their job. They're not paid.
And they've succeeded in that a few times, and that's emboldening them, encouraging them.
Ben, but they've succeeded only because of the collusion of also activist journalists who are intent on making sure that these stories stay.
I mean, we've had Boris go, we've had Liz Truss go, we've had the Chancellor, we've now got Dominic Raab, and I'm not saying that none of them gain brownie points with me, but it's a pattern of behaviour, and we need to be focusing on what's wrong with the country, all pulling them together and getting us out of this mess. And this is just, you know, minuscule.
Yeah, you're right. Right, front page of The Express, you've got this story as well, Maggie. This is this terrible death of a 2-year-old boy who died after exposure from mould in his home.
Yeah, look at that poor little lad.
His little face.
And you know what jumps out at me straight away, Bev, is this is Rochdale again.
Yeah.
I resigned because of the authorities turning a blind eye to what was going on with children being sexually abused. What I found out afterwards was it wasn't just Rochdale, and I would say that this case is one case. And yes, it was damp in the home, and yes, there was neglect in dealing with it. But it's people in positions of authority who are turning a blind eye and not acting when they should act. There's a lack of communication because a nurse put a report in, it didn't get as far as the authorities that should have got there, and we've got a death that should never have happened.
And Michael Gove spoke out very strongly about this. Did you hear this, Ben, yesterday? He absolutely, you know, said that really the man who was responsible for Rochdale Borough-wide housing shouldn't be in his job because these complaints by this poor boy, Awab Ishaq, his complaints by his father were ignored and ignored. They said paint over the mould, and this went on for a long time. I think somebody like that should still be in their job.
Well, I mean, you've got to hold people accountable for fundamental failures like this. But, you know, just going back to the chat you had with Liam, taxes are a 70-year high. Public services should be absolutely brilliant. You know, they're collecting so much tax in the state. The least that we could expect is decent housing. But we don't. We have a broken public service. All public services across the board are basically broken.
They're not fit for purpose,
They're not fit for purpose. And if they're going to raise anything at PMQs, they should be raising the fate of this little boy as evidence of a fundamental failing in 12 years of Conservative Party government. They talk about compassionate conservatism. Well, where's the compassion in allowing a family to live in mould-infested environment?
Here, I mean, there's the specific issue of what's gone on in this case, but there's also the much broader issue about why are we not building enough houses in this country? Why are people in the 21st century living in such squalid conditions? And I actually think Michael Gove, as Levelling Up Secretary, as somebody who's been a cabinet minister for the past 12 years, or most of the past 12 years, has to play a big...
He's part of the problem. Absolutely. Michael Gove is part of the problem. For him to point to someone else, perfectly legitimately perhaps, but without any introspection and without standing up, as you were saying, Joan, actually standing up and taking responsibility for it, is hopeless.
Now, see, Gove says you can't blame the lack of government funding for the death of the 2-year-old. He said it was the local funding that should have paid for this.
It also says, Bev, that, you know, the family were repeatedly going in front of these people and crying, begging. I can, because that's what we heard with the victims of abuse. You know, mums going into multi-agency meetings and saying, please, please help me. It's individual people who have to take responsibility when they hear of these cases. And actually, sometimes that means standing up to bosses who tell you to go away. Everybody has to take responsibility.
But people, do you know what? You'll have seen this so many times, Maggie, is that they were saying this family's first language was not English. They were struggling to be understood by the council. And those families often don't have the competence or the assertiveness.
They don't have a voice, do they?
They don't have a voice to go in and say, no, my little boy has a condition of breathing, which means that these mould particles are going to kill him. And they did.
Yeah.
Can you imagine walking in the shoes of those parents?
You know, and when I set up the charity, it's the same principle. Victims of sexual abuse don't have a voice. Yeah. They need somebody to advocate for them. This family needed somebody to stand alongside them. And if that was a nurse or a district nurse or somebody in a local organisation, that could have made all the difference, because somebody needs to stand up and fight and say, this is not right, because it is inhumane. Somebody should be held accountable, but this won't be an isolated incident. This will go in all.
It's also not just an issue of funding. It's not just an issue of funding in these specific circumstances, and it's not just an issue of funding at the national level either, where you've got restrictions on house building because of planning laws, for example. We need to actually go back and look at what we're doing about planning legislation in this country that's preventing new houses being built in the scale in which we need
I want
them.
to just revisit just for a minute the story that we did in the first hour, which was about how few children, well, not how few children, but how many children didn't make it back into the education system. A fifth of all pupils didn't go back after lockdown. Lots of parents have been getting in touch. And actually, Joanna, quite a few of them were saying, why would you send your children to school for indoctrination? Now, you were writing about this recently, weren't you? I read this on your Substack. Just explain what people mean when they say that.
Well, I have an awful lot of sympathy, let me just say, first of all, with that argument. And I guess what people mean is when they're looking at the politicisation of schooling, of the messages that children are being taught. I mean, not just messages, but explicit lessons around gender, around sex education, teaching around critical race theory, white superiority, for example, that these messages are being given to children in the classroom. And I think it's absolutely right that parents object to that. I'm not convinced that withdrawing your children from school is the answer for everyone. For some parents who are very lucky to be in a position where they can teach their children at home, that might be the answer. But I actually think being in the classroom and parents knowing what's going on and really pushing back and challenging teachers who are foisting this political agenda onto children, you know, that's what we need to do. We need to be challenging.
I think, you know, homeschooling can be a really good alternative, but we still have to have a safety system to pick up the children who are falling through the net and at risk of abuse. That's...
But these numbers...
I'm so sorry. We'll carry on this conversation after midday as well. But listen, after the break, world leaders have held emergency talks after a Russian missile landed in Poland. Do we need to bolster up, or will Sunak be reluctant to increase defence spending? We're expecting the NATO summit in Brussels to start at any moment now. We'll bring it to you when it does. But first, here's the news.
It's 11:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister has agreed to Dominic Raab's request for an independent investigation into allegations about his conduct, saying integrity, professionalism and accountability are the core values of this government. The inquiry would look into 2 formal complaints that have been made about Mr Raab's behaviour towards junior colleagues. He won't be stepping down from his post as Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor when the investigation takes place. But Mr Raab will face scrutiny in the Commons at Prime Minister's questions today when he stands in for Rishi Sunak. We'll bring that to you here live. The Polish president says there's no indication the missile strike, which killed 2 people, was an intentional attack on his country. Posting on social media, he said there were many indications it was an air defence missile that unfortunately fell on Polish territory. The rate of consumer prices index inflation rose to 11.1% last month. The ONS says that's up from 10.1% in September. They've said rising gas and electricity prices, as well as increasing food prices, has driven inflation to the highest level for over 40 years. Royal Naval Shipbuilding is returning to Belfast with a new site pledging to create 2,000 UK jobs. The MOD have commissioned the building of 3 support ships in a contract worth £1.6 billion. Each vessel will measure the length of 2 Premier League football pitches. Their final assembly will take place at a shipyard in Belfast. TV, online, DAB+ radio, you're up to date on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:38. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. Thank you for keeping me company. You've been sending in your views, which of course are incredibly important to us. Keep them coming, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first of all, shipbuilding will return to Belfast after the government announced a new deal to construct 3 new naval support ships. The £1.6 billion contract will create 1,200 shipyard jobs and a further 800 jobs in the UK supply chain. Mark White joins me now to give us the detail. Mark, before I get too excited, is this a good news story?
I think potentially very good news story, especially for Belfast. We have a big core audience in Belfast as well, as they will see as the preferred bidder has been announced, providing it gets final Treasury approval, which I'm sure it will, shipbuilding returning to Belfast. Harland and Wolff, those big giant cranes, one of the first things you see when you're flying into Belfast, the city that built the Titanic. Well, that Harland and Wolff dockyard has been constructing wind turbines for the last God knows how many years. So a return to shipbuilding is absolutely, of course, to be welcome. And I'm sure they will be celebrating those that work in this industry or did work in this industry in Belfast. Now, what the contract is for 3 giant support vessels that will provide ammunition, stores and other provisions for our new aircraft carriers, the HMS Queen Elizabeth and the Prince of Wales. They'll also help supply our frigates and destroyers. They're a crucial part of naval operations in ensuring that we can project power away from the UK, thousands of miles offshore. They provide all the vital supplies that you need to do that. And we've been waiting for a very long time for these solid supply support vessels to be announced, and now the preferred bidder is an Anglo-Spanish consortium that also includes Navantia, which is a renowned Spanish shipbuilder based in Cadiz there, and clearly also in this country Harland and Wolff is going to be involved. They're going to be involved down at Appledore as well in the assembly. We're talking about 1,200 jobs employed in the shipyards here in the UK, with another 800 in the support sector. So potentially, well, not just potentially, it is, if it finally gets signed off, very good news. And of course, it is part and parcel of the need to ensure that our defences are bolstered, improved going forward. We've had years and years of successive governments hollowing out defence ever since really the end of the Cold War. Now we're in a period where we see the war raging in a European country, issues in the Middle East, issues in North Korea, issues with potentially China and Taiwan, big geopolitical issues and security challenges that this government has to face. And they need ships like that to ensure we're properly defended.
OK, thank you, Mark. Let's bring in Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former Royal Navy Rear Admiral. Good morning, Chris. It seems like a good news story, improving the defences of Great Britain. Is this a good use of our military money, do you think?
It's extremely good news because we're long overdue for these support ships. We've only got one very old Fort Victoria, it's called, a support ship flogging around the oceans at the moment. That was built at Harlenden Wharf back in 1986. So these 3 new support ships are absolutely vital to supporting the Royal Navy in its mission around the world. The only downside is work doesn't start until 2025 and they're not operational until 2032. And we need these ships now, frankly. If you look at the previous support ships that were built in South Korea, they took 3 years to build. So we've got to actually speed up our processes and get these ships into commission as early as possible because we need them now.
When you say we need them now, Chris, are we vulnerable to any sort of attack from other countries now? We're not vulnerable, are we, as an island? But are we?
Well, yeah. I mean, we've got a situation in the world now where the free world is confronting aggressive authoritarian powers like China, Russia and Iran. We're seeing Russia on NATO's doorstep at the moment. We've got Russian submarines in the North Atlantic, and we have cruise missile firing ships and submarines of the Russian Northern Fleet in our waters pretty frequently. We're not prepared, I'm afraid, in this post-Afghanistan and post-Iraq world to actually confront on our own some of these threats. Happily, we're part of NATO. Happily, we're part of the NATO alliance. And so we have a combined capability. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that a lot of our capability is not geared to confronting China and Russia at the moment.
OK, Mark, let me bring you in on that.
Yes, just actually to back up what Chris was saying there and about the instabilities and the challenges that we face, some breaking news coming through from the Reuters news agency about an incident we were reporting a little earlier about this oil tanker that appears to have been targeted in a drone strike in the Gulf just near Oman. They are quoting an Israeli official saying that Iran is responsible for the attack on that oil tanker. The Israeli official goes on to say that Iran used a drone of the type supplied to Russia in Ukraine. So we've seen these drones, of course, that have flown into apartment buildings and things like that. Well, according to the Israelis, that's the type of drone that was used here. And it goes to show, you know, all eyes, of course, are focused on Ukraine at the moment, but there are great instabilities in areas like in the Gulf. And we have a very significant Royal Navy presence there with minesweepers, a frigate in that area and support ship as well. So these new support vessels that have been announced, as Chris was saying there, they are absolutely needed. It's just a pity that there's still some way off.
Chris, let me bring you in on a reaction. I know you're just hearing that news for the first time. What do you make of it? What might the implications of that be?
Well, it just proves my point that we are confronting Russia, China and Iran. They're being very aggressive. Let's be very clear. The doctrine of all 3 countries is expressed by war in peace. At the moment, they all have military and security doctrines that seek to undermine the institutions and the way of life of the free world. And you've just seen a demonstration of it by Iran attacking a tanker. And we're going to see increasing amount of interference, I suspect, with unmanned vehicles and other anonymous ways of doing these things on our infrastructure, on our trade and other things. And we need to be alert to the fact that we are in a connected but contested world now. And if we don't get to grips with that, we're going to find ourselves excluded basically from globalization and everything that brings.
OK, Mark, regardless of what Iran, the Iranian government are doing at the moment with the revolution, the uprising there, this news story that you have just broken to us, what implications might that have for the fact that England are due to play Iran in the World Cup next week?
Well, clearly there's concern because that is in an area of the world where we have seen security challenges in the past, attacks on oil tankers. It's one of the reasons why we have a significant Royal Naval presence in that area. It is called upon often the Royal Navy and other allied naval ships to escort tankers through that area. That could well happen again, depending whether this is a one-off or whether we are about to see a spate of attacks again. And interestingly, actually, the Royal Navy has supplied some of their vessels in that region to the Qataris, or they're working with the Qataris to help in security around the World Cup, because, of course, it's a big international event which could attract some, unfortunate attention from those that might want to do us harm.
We've got this autumn statement tomorrow. Now, Rishi Sunak, yesterday, when he announced this contract with the ships that we're talking about now, he refused to be drawn on whether he would commit any more money to our military. Do you think he will?
Well, listen, the government is facing huge challenges. We are in an economic crisis.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mark. We've got to go to this. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Vigilance across our eastern flank.
NATO.
And we are monitoring the situation on a continuous basis. And investigation into this incident is ongoing, and we need to await its outcome. But we have no indication that this was the result of a deliberate attack. And we have no indication that Russia is preparing offensive military actions against NATO. Our preliminary analysis suggests that the incident was likely caused by a Ukrainian air defense missile fired to defend Ukrainian territory against Russian cruise missile attacks. But let me be clear, this is not Ukraine's fault. Russia bears ultimate responsibility as it continues its illegal war against Ukraine. In the meeting today, NATO allies offered their deepest condolences on the tragic loss of life. They expressed their strong solidarity with our valued ally Poland and made clear that we will continue to support Ukraine in its right to self-defense. Russia must stop this senseless war. Last night, I spoke with the Polish President Andrzej Duda and with US President Joe Biden. We agreed that we need to stay vigilant, calm, and closely coordinated. We will continue to consult and monitor the situation very closely. NATO stands united, and we will always do what is necessary to protect and defend all allies. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
We start with Polish radio, lady in grey at the back.
Thank you, Anna. Beata Płomecka, Polish Radio, Public Broadcaster, Polskie Radio. Secretary General, what could be the outcome in concrete terms of today's meeting? Can we expect enhancing Europe's air defense, especially in the countries bordering Ukraine? Because as long as the war continues, there will be Russian rockets striking Ukrainian cities, and there is a risk that such situation can happen again. Thank you very much.
In the meeting today, NATO allies expressed their strong support, solidarity with our ally Poland. They also expressed their deepest condolences for the tragic loss of life. And NATO has significantly increased its presence in the eastern part of the alliance, in particular since the invasion of Ukraine in February, with more troops on land, ground troops, but also with significant, substantial air and naval power. And this has, of course, both increased our air defense capabilities, but also our capabilities to monitor, to have full picture of what's going on the border between NATO allies like Poland and Ukraine. And we are constantly assessing what more we need to do. We also have made important decisions at our summit in Madrid to further strengthen our presence in the eastern part of the alliance.
BBC.
Thank you. Jessica Parker from BBC News. I just wanted to ask, given the incident that happened last night, do you think this was perhaps the most tense moment for NATO in this conflict so far? Thank you.
I'm always careful to rank different incidents and situations. It demonstrates that the war in Ukraine, which is President Putin's responsibility, continues to create dangerous situations. At the same time, we have to remember that this happened at the same time as Russia launched a wave of new indiscriminate missile and air attacks on Ukrainian cities, attacking critical civilian infrastructure, hitting civilian targets. Then it's nothing strange. Then, of course, that is in itself a very dangerous situation. And then we then also see that there may be also consequences on NATO territory. It's a consequence of the war that Russia wages against Ukraine.
The Ukrainian news agency in the middle.
Thank you for the floor. Dmytro Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. I just want to mention that Ukrainians do understand the pain of the Polish people and have a greatest sympathy with them. My question is how that incident will be reflected on the assistance that allies provided for Ukraine in air defense. Where will be some kind of new systems to cover the Ukrainian sky? Thanks.
There will be a meeting today in the contact group for Ukraine to coordinate the support NATO allies and partners and others are providing to Ukraine. And the main focus of our efforts over the last months has been on air defense, especially since Russia started to launch these indiscriminate attacks on Ukrainian cities a few weeks ago. And I welcome that more and more allies and partners are providing advanced air defense systems to Ukraine. NASAMS, Hawk batteries from Spain and others. And I also know that Sweden has made new announcements of additional support also with air defenses to Ukraine. So we are mobilizing additional support, especially when it comes to different types of air defenses. NATO is also providing counter-drone systems. We need many different systems to protect against cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, but also drones. And we need a layered defense of Ukraine. That's exactly what the allies are providing in different ways.
Bloomberg.
Natalia Drozdjak from Bloomberg. Does this incident, will this spur more air defense for allies on the eastern border? I know you said there has been a step up at the beginning of the war, but does more need to be done?
We are constantly assessing our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. We have significantly increased our presence on land, at sea and in the air, and that has significantly increased our air defense capabilities, especially in the eastern part of the alliance. At the same time, we have no indication that this incident was a result of a deliberate attack on NATO territory. And we have no indications that Russia is planning offensive military actions against NATO allies. So I think this demonstrates the dangers connected to the ongoing war in Ukraine, but it hasn't changed our fundamental assessment of the threat against NATO allies. It shows the importance of monitoring, of being vigilant of the presence, and we made decisions for long-term adaptation of NATO's deterrence and defence at the summit in Madrid in June, and that includes partly more presence in the east, partly more pre-positioned equipment, in particular in the eastern part of the alliance, and partly earmarked forces so we can quickly scale up the battle groups we have in the eastern part of the alliance. And of course, all of this will also further strengthen our air defence capabilities. Then air defence is partly land-based, but air defence is also very often air-based, also aircraft, and naval-based, based on our ships. And of course, air forces and naval forces is something we very quickly can move in. SACEUR has, our Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, has already authorities to move in additional forces, including air and naval forces, to augment our air defences quickly if needed.
Frankfurt Allgemeine.
Thanks a lot. Thomas Gutschka, Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung. Secretary General, a few factual questions, if I may. First of all, the debris found near the border of Poland and Ukraine, is this debris only from an Ukrainian rocket launched to intercept a Russian missile, or is there also debris of a Russian missile? Secondly, what was the likely trajectory of the Russian missile that was meant to intercept by Ukraine? And thirdly,
the NATO news conference live from Brussels with Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, saying no evidence that the attack in Poland was part of a deliberate attack by Russia. Ukrainian air defence missiles are suspected against a Russian cruise missile caused that explosion. This is not Ukraine's fault, said Jens Stoltenberg.